Welcome to this interview, which is brought to you by the Center for Protecting Women Online and the Open University. This is a special event for International Women's Day. My name is Dr. Ksenia Bakina, and I'm a research fellow in law and policy at the Center. My research focuses on image-based sexual abuse and violence against women. I will be your host for today's talk. For International Women's Day, I have a very special guest here with me, Dr. Anne Olivarius, an international feminist lawyer whose work on women's rights spans for almost 4 decades. Dr. Olivarius is a senior partner at a law firm, Olivarius, and she has worked throughout her career on numerous cases in relation to sexual harassment, discrimination, and image-based sexual abuse. She has also acted as a negotiator for Mexico in the drafting of North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and introduced the concept of feminist foreign policy, later adopted by countries across the world. Dr. Olivarius also advised numerous prominent individuals, including Bill Gates, Margaret Thatcher, Queen Rania of Jordan, and Nelson Mandela, following his presidency in South Africa. Dr. Olivarius' crucial work has also been widely recognized. She's received a Lifetime Achievement Award from Yale Women. She has been appointed as an honorary King's Counsel for her work on women's rights, and she received an award of the Order of British Empire, OBE, in recognition for her service to justice, women, and equality. So Anne, welcome to this interview. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
So I want to start this interview by talking a little bit about the past and the start of your career. And as a young student at Yale University, you were already breaking legal norms, and you acted and you were involved in Alexander versus Yale, which was such a pivotal case because it recognized that sexual harassment is equivalent to discrimination and it's illegal. This was around in the 80s. So could you tell us more about your involvement in this case?
Sure. It was the late 70s, actually. I was at Yale as an undergraduate. It was the early days when women were just going to these major institutions. And it was really clear that it was a dual education, in a sense, one for men, one for women. And for the women, we were taken into the institution. But as the president of Yale said, that if a woman didn't know how to negotiate her way out of an awkward situation with a professor and felt she had to have an affair, then she really didn't have the smarts to go to Yale. And that was the norm. It was also the days when the president of Yale, Kingman Brewster, who later became ambassador to the Court of St. James in England, he said that the purpose of Yale was to educate 1,000 male leaders every year. So what were we women doing there? As you walked around the institution, you saw wonderfully big, comfortable chairs that would seat men, many men comfortably, not many of us women who are more petite. The pictures on the wall were all of elegant, generally white men. And that was the place, that was the aura of Yale. I was asked to do a report to the Yale Corporation on the status of women at the institution in 1977. We'd been there in various capacities for roughly 10 years, but not with full, like a lot of women there, just smittens of women. We were coming more online there of more and more women. And I did this report, and it was really clear that there were lots of students who were having affairs with professors, and they felt it was their freedom to have those affairs. And the male professors certainly took advantage of that situation. And then there's lots of student-on-student sexual events, many of which would be called rape. And so we produced this report, and then we asked Yale if they would put together just a committee, a mechanism, some way where a woman or man, but a person who felt that they'd been sexually harassed or discriminated against or sexually assaulted or raped could register at some place. And Yale said, no, the problem doesn't exist. We don't have those issues. Mind you, at those days, there was no term as sexual harassment. That was brand new. So we were coining a term, and we were saying it's illegal under the law. That wasn't recognized yet. So Yale wouldn't do anything. And then one day when I was graduating in my last year, I had a call from the secretary of the university, and he said that Keith Bryan, who was a flute professor, a band, person, who had raped Ronnie Alexander, he was going to sue me for all sorts of issues. I hadn't gone to law school yet. I didn't have any idea I could be sued. He said the provost of the university said that I was going to be arrested, and crimes were going to be brought against me. And I said, for what? For organizing this report, presenting it to the Yale Corporation, documenting the fact that these women had been raped by these men. What is wrong with that? And I just assumed naively that it was in our interest that everybody had sisters or daughters, wives, girlfriends, and that we all wanted to stop gender violence. No, that was not the case how Yale saw it. And so, in sort of quiet desperation, I thought, what do I do if I'm going to be arrested? I better do something. So I walked down the streets of New Haven to the New Haven Law Collective, Yale graduates, Yale law students, and said, I have a problem and I think we need to do a lawsuit. And then I designed this lawsuit that became Alexander v. Yale, and that became the precursor suit to a whole bunch of suits and to sex discrimination law in the West and in the United States. We lost that suit because by the time it came to trial, most of us had graduated from Yale, so we were done. They said we didn't have standing to bring the suit. But what we were able to do is that the judge did say that if you are sexually harassed, they defined the term, they agreed that this was against the civil rights law, and this was an illegal act. And from there, all the other suits started to win that followed after us that took the same legal claims and brought them to courts to have an airing. And they started to prevail and win, and now we have sex discrimination law.
And I was wondering, what challenges did you face then as a woman trying to sue Yale University?
Yes. That's such a good question because, those of us who got into Yale as young women, we really believed in Yale. I thought it was a majestic institution. I adored it. I felt so grateful every day to be there, to learn. It was just the most thrilling academic experience for me. When I filed suit, all sorts of stuff happened. The university actually lied about meetings that I'd had at the provost office. And when we're actually in deposition in the court case, it became apparent that the secretary of the university, Henry Chauncey, had lied. It was inconceivable to me, Ksenia, that somebody at Yale would lie and about something like this. That was a whole new world for me. And then in the general marketplace of ideas and in the press, I got all sorts of threats and stuff. I had a used condom arrive in my mailbox. Feces came in my mailbox. All sorts of threats. Keith Bryan's wife, who worked in my master's office, who handled my academic transcripts, she said that my applications for a Rhodes Scholarship, for a Marshall Scholarship, to go to Harvard or Yale Law School, she would scupper those and she would make sure that I didn't get in, and she had control over those things going out. I had all sorts of threats, and then to my physical safety by her husband. But, these days, interestingly, there are threats. We got through that. We prevailed. But I will say, you have to fight the good fight, because if you don't, nobody does. If you live in fear, that doesn't work. And these days, of course, at Yale, people look at me as something of a shining star. I'm a heroine now. They're really grateful for this. We've changed the whole conversation. But it does mean you have to have some resilience. You better find some good cohorts to keep you strong, because certainly I would get things, those were the days when you would, from newspapers, cut and paste letters. So they sent threats with these cut and pasted letters on them saying, I should be murdered. I should have my labia cut and be sent to jail. And I kept thinking, for what? Because we're trying to get a grievance procedure put into Yale so we know how many sexual harassers, rapists might be there. Why would that cause so much of a stir? What was the problem with that? But it was a problem, clearly.
Yes, and I think it's so difficult, generally, just trying to put myself in your shoes I think it would be difficult to even sort of gather the strength to challenge an institution, first of all, like Yale, and to say, look, this should be happening, because there's such an imbalance of power from the outset. But to then also have to deal with so much abuse and continue, I think it's phenomenal, and you are a heroine in that regard. But I also know that you've coined not only the term sort of sexual harassment, but you've also coined the term date rape, which is a very powerful term because it kind of puts on the map the idea that dates, which are usually seen as nice, romantic, enjoyable, as a place of violence by putting it together with the term rape. And it's nowadays such an accepted term, and it's accepted term worldwide. If somebody says to you, date rape, you know exactly what has happened. That it's illegal. You know that you can go to the police or to the courts and try to get justice. But how did you actually coin that term? And also, how did this become such a worldwide accepted term?
I should say sexual harassment, that term was being used. Catherine McKinnon, other people were using the term. I just publicized it more and put it into general circulation a lot more by our lawsuit. Date rape is something different. I was with Gloria Steinem then in 1974, and we went to Wesleyan, which was up the block, a university up the block from Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. And we went to Wesleyan for a women's conference. There were a group of about 1,000 people in the room. And I asked the question, how many of you have been raped? Ksenia, not one person raised their hand. And I stood looking at the crowd. Gloria looked at me, and I said, how many of you have been, and then I hesitated and said, date raped? And almost every hand in the room went up. People then said, well, I had sex I didn't want to, or I had various sexual experiences in that situation when I was out on a date that I didn't want to have, that I didn't know how to get out of. Some of them didn't lead to rape, but sexual assault of different types. And it very quickly caught on because everybody could resonate with it. People knew what it meant. It wasn't a technical term. Even sexual harassment, people would say, well, what does that mean to be sexually harassed? And you'd give examples. But date rape, for some reason, was a galvanizing two words. People said, oh, yeah, I can relate to that. I know what that's about. We know what that is. And it caught on. And then, of course, Susan Brown Miller wrote about it afterwards. So it got good traction, and still people understand it now.
Absolutely. And I think it's similar to also the term domestic violence, because it brings the reality of the fact that domestic arena is not just about comfort and joy, but it's also a place of violence and abuse. And the same with the term date rape. It really signals the problem that has occurred. You've done a lot of work with different universities, including Cambridge University, in terms of their policies on how they deal with sexual harassment or sexual abuse that happens on campus. What would your advice be to a university to ensure that they safeguard their students on campus effectively?
We've done a lot of work with universities, Oxford, Cambridge in this country, all sorts of universities. Issue is tough because when it comes down to faculty or administrators having sex with students, I think what you have to do is put it's not possible policy. You just have to say, no, when you graduate, it's a whole different thing, but the power difference is so great that it's really important. And there's a whole history of academics and administrators who are on their second wives, third wives. Students come through for a few years, they have their pickings. Those women go off, they take their next group. There's a long history of that. We need to stop that. And so by regulations at universities saying you're fired if you have sexual events with students, I think that has to be really clear. In terms of student-on-student sexual policies, that's harder because the world we live in, people say, well, she asked for it, she begged for it, she was drunk. He said, she said, you have all those kinds of issues. And that you have to have intolerance, I think, on the part of the university, that if someone is credibly accused, there has to be a pretty prompt investigation. And if found most likely that occurred, then the person should be removed and they should go down on their permanent record that this is a problem, and maybe the police should be brought in too. But we need to do something more serious about it. And right now, even rape in society, if you're raped, if I was raped today, you were raped today, Ksenia, it would be 2027 that we would be in trial in this country, in Britain. That's too long. Witnesses disappear, memories fade, evidence is corrupted. You can't do that. And getting a conviction for rape in this country, it's almost impossible. It's a free crime. So are we going to take this seriously, or not. And right now, there's no commitment to taking it seriously that I can see.
Absolutely. I think that rape and the way it's dealt with, whether in society or at universities, needs to be improved so much. But also, I remember reading the news just earlier on this year that Cambridge University has finally put in a policy that prohibits professor-student relationship. And Oxford University had done that just in 2023. And I remember being so surprised that this policy is just coming in now, because to me, it seemed that this should have been in place so long ago. The reality of it wasn't. The reality of it is 2023 and 2024 that Oxford and Cambridge University had finally said, no, teacher-student relationships should not be happening, in spite of the fact that there's such an imbalance of power in those relationships, and there are questions arise just through their existence. So we've said so far quite a lot about sexual harassment and sexual abuse in an offline format, whether that's in university or in society in general. But I want to now move towards online violence. And I know that back in 2013, you represented a famous YouTube blogger, Chrissy Chambers. And this was one of the first cases that gained public attention on the issue of what was termed revenge pornography. Now it's termed image-based sexual abuse. And so I wanted you to tell me more about your involvement in Chrissy's case.
This was actually the first case in this area. Chrissy came to me with her partner, Bria Cam, and they explained what happened to her, that she had had sex to finish off a relationship with a British man, and she's an American girl. And apparently he got her drunk. She wants to be an actress, and so she thought, I've never been drunk before. Perhaps I should have this experience so I know what it's like, so I can be an actress to act like I'm drunk in film. She's a very beautiful woman, and so she agreed that she would drink with him. And she did, and she became to the point of knocked out drunk. And at that point, he then filmed her and then had sex with her. And she didn't know anything about this. They broke up. He became very bitter that they broke up. And then she became a very famous blogger to teenagers, mostly, the teenage crowd, which she would say, this is how you wear a bra with Bria Cam. This is how you first have your first lesbian relationship. This is how you dance. This is how you do all sorts of stuff. And they're quite engaging, lovely, early videos, podcasts on these topics. And then one day, one of her great number of people watched her, wrote her and said, "You're a fucking whore. What do you think you're doing?" She had seen the videotape of what her ex-boyfriend had put online. She was startled. She knew nothing about it. And it was painful to see, very graphic, really painful. And clearly in it, she's completely knocked out drunk. She's just spawned out on a table. Her hands are off at her side, her head, she looks like she's totally out of commission with life at that moment. So we approached him. We then brought suit, and we had a hard time with the police. This happened in Atlanta, Georgia. They wanted no part. The police wanted to investigate, which is to say, see all the videos, and they were very keen about that, but then they did nothing. And in Britain, the same. And afterwards, when we won this case, resolved this case by settlement, and then we created law on this, we drafted this revenge porn bill with others. I said to the Met Police, Cressida Dick, how come you folks didn't take this case on? Why didn't you do this? And she said for two reasons. One is that she had a sex toy in one of her hands, falling out of her hand on the video. I said, but she was totally knocked out. Obviously, she couldn't use it. She wasn't using it in the videos. Clearly, it was placed there. She said, well, you could argue that, but there was this other really deciding moment. And I said, well, what was that decisive moment that the Met Police wouldn't take this case? And she looked at me, and Cressida said, her pubic hair had been shaved. And I said, and what does that mean? And she said, what do you mean, what does that mean? It means that she's eager for sex, that she was into it. And I said, every girl I know under 30 perhaps shaves their pubic hair. If you go to the gym, it's pretty standard. And just arbitrarily over 30, we don't. It's a cultural thing. It doesn't mean that every girl under 30 is saying, hey, bring it on, I'm interested at all. that was the reason why you didn't take the case on. And she said, of course, well, don't quote me on it. I said, yeah, I'm going to quote you on it. But, it hasn't changed. So we brought that case. We then worked on the legislation, and the legislation was a triumph in many respects. But of course, the legislation, some sad things. If you're doing it to have fun instead of to hurt somebody, then it's okay. And if you do revenge porn to earn money, that's not against the law either. Now, why those two exceptions exist is hard to understand, because obviously both of those things will hurt the person. But if you hurt the person, you can go to jail. We do have many thousands of people who have gone to jail on this, but the very painful point is that about half of them are women. Women who do this to other women. And that, I think, is a really important point. And it grieves me to think that we don't understand what it's like as a woman to have that happen to you, that you would do that to another woman. But it happens routinely.
Absolutely. And actually, when I was doing my research for my PhD, which was also on revenge pornography, I did come across a lot of these websites where there may have been also women posting pictures of their current boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, just to kind of somehow hurt her. And it's such a shame that in our culture, we are taught to compete rather than support.
Exactly.
And we're taught to distrust rather than believe.
Exactly.
And it's something that really needs to change for us, women as a whole.
I think that now we're facing much bigger problems and images with deepfakes. Of course, any woman can be completely harassed and abused, even though we tell our girls, behave yourself, be cautious, don't drink, don't take drugs, don't walk outside at night, don't wear inviting clothes. Even for the girls who do all of that, who are very prudent, careful, who always have guardians, they're with mates all the time, who would never step a foot wrong. Even the best of the best of the best goody goods now can have a deep fake picture put online of them completely outside of their knowledge. It's just done. And that people look at it and say, oh, well. And of course, once you have that image online, it's very hard to get a job afterwards, to hold your head up, have decency with you. People think, oh, she's a terrible girl. No matter the truth that it's a deep fake, it's still, there's an awful lot of discrimination towards people who have been victims of this. So harm is done to a much greater degree than what we did with Chrissy Chambers.
Absolutely. And I think it was just the start of people recognizing how much online abuse is out there against women and how it takes different forms. And I wanted to ask about justice. You've secured an award for Chrissy, but in terms of victims of online abuse, what kind of justice do you think they might want, and how easy is it to get it?
Getting a website where people who have been convicted of revenge porn actually have their names put down, people convicted of rape, of sexual assault, of any of these kind of image-based abuse. That should be online so people understand that's the kind of person you are. That's what you do. And then people can make a decision how they feel about you. But those names should come up pretty routinely, and with a face, with your address. It seems to me you should be exposed, because these things only get powerful and they stay happening because of secrets and anonymity.
Yeah.
That has to disappear. Then, of course, to the degree that you can get money damages, civil suits, yes, those should be done also. And, jail times, I'm not so sure they're as effective, and our justice system is overburdened. There's not enough resources there now, even for cases of rape. As I said, it's a free crime. You might as well rape because nothing's going to happen. It's okay. I mean, in the United States, we have a convicted rapist who was president of the United States. 40% of American women who voted for a rapist, a felon. That doesn't seem to bother people. And that's a concern.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the fact is that you might put people to prison, and I think a financial award is fantastic, but then you're still dealing with the aftermath, with all the images that are still available online, and actually removing those images from different platforms, all the various websites that they could appear, is really like a whack-a-mole game, because it's across, you might have to deal with different jurisdictions because websites are registered in different places, and some may be more, willing to take the images down, but then others might hide behind various laws for platforms, for third-party publications. So it seems that justice in a traditional sense of putting the perpetrator in jail is really not as effective in combating this type of crime and in combating these type of activities. And also, I wanted to ask you about, obviously, your experience as a lawyer representing victims of offline sexual harassment and online sexual harassment. Can we actually separate the two in today's world, or where do they connect?
Yeah. They're one and the same. I don't see how you can separate them. The only way we deal with the problem, of course, we've had clients where parents call us to say that their daughter has killed themselves. Okay, then you have to bring murder claims. Things have to be done on that so you can put people in jail. That's a really serious outcome, and people have to be made aware of that, and they have to pay for putting someone in a position where they they kill themselves. But let's say in general, maybe there's a lot of people who don't have resources. Putting them in jail makes no sense. Civil cases don't work. What you have to do is go after the platforms. We have to change the law so we have regulation. I was working on the online harms bill that is, with us now. The problem with that is it was much stronger, and then of course it has lost a lot of its pluck. I had hoped, because there's something called the CDA in America, which prohibits and protects the platforms and prohibits the platforms from having to be responsible for what's published on them. Getting that removed is going to be really, really tough. I'd hoped in Britain we could be the leader in the world to make it possible so that they have to be regulated. The other thing we have, of course, we have anonymity for a lot of stuff, but we now have the technological tools that can invade both the web, the deep web, and the dark web. And we can find out pretty much who has done this stuff. We need to regularize those, make them available, make them so not just governments have that capacity, but private firms, people can actually learn how to unmask people who get online and who threaten and who do harm to people. And they do it consciously. That has to be addressed, and then there have to be penalties for that. For the platforms, of course, monetary penalties would go a long distance to actually enforce those things. Now, are you going to get every penalty for something that maybe Putin supports and Russian, oligarchs use that tool to hurt people? Well, that may be tough, but certainly websites that go up, platforms that are available to the West, you can block a lot of stuff. We can block platforms that are really hurting people. And the ones that continue to do that, they have to be regulated, and we have to take that stuff offline. And there have to be penalties for doing that. People have to feel the pain, and the platforms have to be the ones held to account.
I completely agree with you, especially because the law, when the only time these platforms have taken notice is when they're presented with copyright suits or data protection suits, which have a lot of monetary fines attached to them. That's when they would act, not necessarily because whatever image or whatever issue that is being published is necessarily illegal. So we've talked about the case of Chrissy Chambers, which was the first case that this idea of revenge pornography has come to public's attention 10, 11 years down the line. Numerous countries, including the United Kingdom, now have laws against image-based sexual abuse. But is the situation changing for women? Is internet becoming a safer place for them right now? What do you think?
I think it dearly is not becoming a safer place. It's becoming a much more dangerous place. And it's interesting, the rise of porn in this period, which we haven't talked about, but certainly it's become an issue where it used to be when I was younger, and I'm almost 70, but when I was younger, porn was something you'd say, well, you have a right to see porn. It was a big issue. It's a free issue, and everybody has a right to do this. But of course, when you look at porn, what you see is the degradation of women. That's the lock, stock, and barrel of it. It's all about sad things happening to women, women being portrayed in degrading positions, humiliating positions. There's very little porn that celebrates women's sexuality, that teaches women how to have ejaculations, that women should have orgasms. The notion is still in pornography that men's sexual experiences and needs are greater. And somehow, they're more sexual beings than we are. Of course, any woman who knows her own sexuality would look at that and say, what silliness. We can have orgasms all night long. Men can't. Most men can. Some may go 2 or 3 times when they're young and full of life, but come on, women can do much more than that all the time and as we get older. We don't get sex education. But porn is out there. It is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. And when you think 8-year-old boys get educated on how to date girls, by watching pornography. It is really quite shocking. We had a case of a woman who came in and she told a terrible story of how this young man would, beat her up and having sex. When I said to her, why? And she said, well, that's what we learned about on porn. So I thought I had to accept all that. That's what they see. It's just the saddest thing. And I think, that it's acceptable for men and women to say that this is really something they talk about it. The mates watch all of this. It's not a healthy environment. And, the studies we see of people who study these things, and again, I can't ascertain whether these are fairly done and correct, but every study comes back saying this generation that has been brought up on porn, they're having much less interesting sex than my generation, for instance. And I think, when I have sex, I don't have images of porn in my head. I'm in the place in that moment with my partner, whoever that might be. And I think these days, when you watch porn all the time and have sex, what kind of sex are you having? Are you really with the person you're with? And if that's how you get educated to have porn, it's very sad. So it's not a big distance between the porn business and intense pornography that is saturating our young communities and our older ones, but certainly the youngsters grow up with this. And then online abuse. It just seems all part of the same thing, that women are still treated terribly. They're treated horribly. And now even so in, some parts of the world, like in the United States, you can't even get a legal abortion in many states. How can this be? In 1973, when Roe v. Wade, the case in the United States that allowed for legal abortion, happened, it seemed like the natural thing, of course, this had to happen. Well, here we are, 50 years later, and 36 million American women every day cannot get an abortion. Huh? How does that happen? The wealthy can, of course. Those who are resourced can. Those who are in certain states can have them. But this is not a world where I would think women's progress, women's future is good. But, it's a more desperate world. We're still in that same place, too, where there's paternity, maternity, parental leave. It doesn't exist in any way. When I had my kids, I was back at work within minutes, days. We didn't have any kind of leave. Okay, now we have some leave, but are the men taking it in the same way? No, it's still a notion that the women raise these kids. It's the women's responsibility. Until that changes, you're not going to have equal job opportunities for women. And of course, you're going to have a degrading culture because women are the other. Women are the underclass. Women are the ones that don't get treated with the kind of respect and opportunities that men have. So I think we're in a very spiraling downward world right now.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think you've highlighted different issues for us as society, from porn to maternity pay, that contribute to the way women are treated online and offline. And I can definitely see your point that a lot of the pornography that we do have available, yes, there are wonderful feminist pornography websites that really celebrate the woman's body and consensual sex, but majority of Pornhub seem to glorify objectification, non-consensual sex, at least in the videos. And it does seem that sort of abuse of women, objectification, and it does seem that from watching those videos that glorify non-consensual sex to then recording a video of your own or taking a deep fake, an image of a person, and making that to look naked and, provocative isn't a far step. So what do you think should be done about this?
It has to be through regulation, education, obviously, but education comes through regulation also. It's a political issue as well as a cultural issue. Things have to change. We have to see a way to go forward. Certainly it's hard to know. I mean, we just saw an election in the United States where a lot of women voted for Donald Trump. Okay, why would they do that? Obviously, because they don't see the women's movement as a way of advancing themselves, that they don't see that the respect that the women's movement offers, the opportunities, is something that they can have access to or that respects them. So we've failed in that. We've got to get a better message out there. But certainly until, we have equal opportunity for women, I think we have no shot at a really happy, progressive world. The future looks pretty dismal. And I think the other thing, as an example, I worked on the online harms bill, and I had a group of MPs around my dining room table one day. There were over a dozen MPs there. There were 3 women, rest men. And I would say the 3 women MPs were very well educated. I would say members of the British aristocracy. These were serious people with serious backgrounds, very much resourced. And the question came up, had they been raped? For instance, was asked by one of the men casually said, well, have you been raped? All three women said they'd been raped. One said multiple times. The other MPs, the men, were startled. And when I said to them, do you know any women who've been raped? They said, well, of course not. Well, how interesting. And so I said to those three women, have you told your partners, your husbands, that you've been raped? None of them had. And I think this is an interesting issue because the degree of rape in society is at epidemic proportions. There's no question about it. Non-consensual sex, date rape, however you want to call it, but sexual assault and rape. It's a rare woman, in my experience, who has not been raped or sexually assaulted, many multiple times. That is our society. That is not known. And I think until women speak up and say, hey, this happens, then we're not going to have change. It's like having an abortion. I know lots of women who've had abortions. 1 out of 3 in set relationships have abortions. We know those numbers in Britain, in the States, but they don't often tell their partner. And that's really important too. These issues, I would hope becomes men issues. They're not women's issues as much. Why aren't the men concerned? If you've been raped, do the men want to take care of a baby that they didn't plan on having? They just wanted a bit of fun or whatever they wanted to do or express their power or whatever. You would think the men would be galvanized, and there'd be really a lot of men out there saying, we're for abortion rights, regardless on this. And certainly on online harms, why wouldn't men stand up and say, hey, this is really inappropriate? Plus the fact, of course, a lot of men are abused also. And nobody wants to talk about that much. And it's not just from the queer crowd or the homosexual crowd or the bisexuals. Men across the board have been humiliated through sexual rape. And that's important also we focus on. I would think this would be a galvanizing issue, that we'd get both parties. It shouldn't be a conservative or a Labor Green Party. No, everybody should be concerned about this. We should say we need decency. We need to stop this. Every person born should have a shot to be the best person they could be, to have the best life, and to get knocked down and kicked out, and maybe even consider suicide or have fewer options in life because you've had image-based abuse, because you've been subjected to porn relationships, and by people who think that these are things that women want when they have no education even to know what you really want sexually, because you don't even know what's possible. And you've heard this nonsense that men have stronger sexual appetites than women. Nonsense. But that's what we hear all the time. So we have to change a lot of things. I hope dearly that under Keir Starmer, we certainly get now some rabble-rousing suggestion that people join and do something about this. And it should be a men's issue as much as it is a women's issue. That divide has to stop. We have to come together. It should be a human rights issue that we all stand behind, regardless of your religion, your creed, your color. It doesn't matter. We should be together on this.
Absolutely. And I think you make such a valid point by saying that it's not just a women's issue, it's a men's issue. Like rape, sexual abuse, sexual violence affects us all as humans. So this, logically thinking, this is an issue that we should be at the forefront. We should be so good at fighting it. Yet the reality is that actually the issue that affects us all, because we are human and we men, women all experience sexual violence, is one issue that we are completely failing at tackling. And this brings me to this question. You've focused on women's rights throughout your career, whether you were involved in drafting NAFTA agreement or fighting cases of image-based sexual abuse. And how do you stay motivated to the cause and to pursuing women's rights? As you've said, even though it may seem sometimes, especially in today's world, that we seem to be going backwards on some of the successes that we've had of the past. So what motivates you to keep going?
I think we all come to a point in our lives when we have to ask the question, what is our purpose? Why do we live? What's this about? What are we doing with our lives? And for me, I have children and boys and girls. I want the best for them. I want the best for everybody I meet. It really hurts me when I see young kids without opportunities, when I see a life around me that people get hurt in. I don't want that to happen to anybody. I feel so blessed that I came of age at a time when the doors opened and I was able to go to Yale. Hell, I mean, I couldn't even apply to Harvard at the time because that was only Radcliffe College, the women's college. Harvard didn't take girls. So I applied to Yale and got in. How lucky I was. I applied for a Rhodes Scholarship. The second year they took women because of an act of parliament. Otherwise, I couldn't have had that. So I see my whole life as really important. My religion, to the extent it exists, the way I live, my purpose is to pay it forward. The blessings I've had coming from a working class family, I've been blessed. I want to give those blessings to other people because women are still the underclass by far. If anything, we're still earning 57p per pound or roughly on that. And I see women not getting progressed. There's a certain elite group that sure have access, but most women are still incredibly discriminated against. And I want to change that. I want a fair shot for everyone. I think it's going to be a much happier world when we're equal, when we feel equal, when we know we have rights, when we have a baby and we may have a partner who will take care of that baby with us and join our lives fully. That's the world. That's my purpose, to try to make that happen. And because I have these excellent credentials, I think it's my job to speak up. I can't be silent in the face of this. Yes, I was not silent when I went to Yale because I even felt then, even from a working class background at Yale, I felt I had to use my voice because I now had a Yale education. I had to stand up for what was right. And I think I've got to do that increasingly all the time, as powerful a way as I can. I'm a part of powerful institutions, so I'm not against them. I'm trying to enhance them, but I want rights for everyone. I want everybody to have good work. I want them to have chances to progress in work. I want women to be protected, men to be protected. I want a better world, and I would hope that we're all on side for that. That's my purpose, and that's what keeps me at the coalface day in and day out.
What do you think we need to change, both in law and society, in order to make offline and online experience for women a better place?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. You've got to change the culture. You've got to change education. You've got to put resources behind police. You've got to educate the police. Right now, the Met, we're told once a week, a partner complains that she's been domestically abused by a Met police officer. Whoa. Those persons should be put off right off the bat, off the force when it's been investigated and if it's found to be true. And those investigations should happen promptly. In every part of society, porn should be regulated. Who gets to watch it? Why? There should be penalties for image-based abuse. It's so extensive. The ICSA, the child abuse group, the study, we participated in that. The recommendations, nothing's been put into place. Things don't seem to change. Here, we have Justin Welby, who's just resigned as head of the Church of England. There's massive abuse there. There's no redress scheme. Nothing's been done. It's a vastly wealthy institution. Why aren't they held to account? Over and over again, you talked yourself about Cambridge, Oxford. How come only now, recently, members of the administration and faculty not have sex with their current students? That should have been a no-brainer. Why is that so hard to get implemented? And then you have to enforce it. There's not a will here. It's men sort of win all the time. They get freebies. I remember at Oxford, somebody said to me, well, this guy's been a professor. He's divorced now. But, because she decides she's fallen in love with him, she should be able to have sex with him. You listen to it and think, yeah, right. Young women are partial to that in those institutions, these teacher relationships. Why is that so hard? It's like a psychiatrist with a patient, a doctor with a patient, me as a lawyer with patients. When you're approached for sex, as we all have been in our professions, the answer is no. It's not a maybe, it's not whatever, it's no. It's a different thing when they're not your client, they're not your patient. But we need to have a whole different thinking, a different approach, different education, and the sense that actually men and women, we're sacrosanct. We should protect our humanity. We should work in a way that advances the community. And right now, there's, you see it, sex in the state, white men who are billionaires are being advantaged. And they could convince so many people to vote for them. But, why is that the case? That's an extreme version right now. All right, we see it. In this country, we're not in that place. Keir Starmer's got a big job in front of him. Can he pull it off? I hope so. But we have to look at life differently. We have to have different conversations. Podcasts like this, different people speaking about their experiences, and women telling truthfully about their rapes, about their abortions. These shouldn't be secrets. There shouldn't be shame. associated. As Madame Pellico said in France in her trial, shame has to move. I've been raped by maybe 100 men. I should not have shame. The men who have done this should bear the shame. And we need to trade that. And even there, here we have the penalties, the sentences. A man gets 3 years for rape. Why do they have maximum times on rape? What kind of case would have to exist that you get a maximum penalty for rape if you couldn't get it in the Pellico trial? When she's drugged, she has no idea what's going on. It's done deliberately. It's filmed. It makes no sense. But even in that situation, and France still doesn't have consent-based laws for sex. So we have a long ways to go. Yeah. And how we're going to get there, I think because you're doing the podcast you're doing, the Center here for Online Violence to look into that, does its work and publicizes it. I continue to bring the lawsuits that I bring to protect women and men who have been sexually abused and raped. We bring those suits. We fight the defamation suits when they throw them at us. And we go back to Parliament, and I write another online harms bill. This time I hope more protective because we lost a lot of the protections, but I hope Britain can still be in the forefront of this whole thing. I think we can do it. I have faith in this society, and I hope now under this government we can actually put an online harms bill in place that Mark Zuckerberg cannot underride, that Bezos, the whole crew, Musk, they can't stop it. We can do it here so that you can't have abuse online. We should be able to accomplish that. We need to accomplish that.
Well, this has been a very insightful discussion. We've talked about so much, and we've covered such a range of topics, from sexual harassment to image-based sexual abuse and the changes that need to happen in society, that I just want to say thank you very much, Anne, for being here today and for talking to me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you do. It's important.